Mid-afternoon, April 22, 1915, near the Belgian town of Ypres. Soldiers looking out over no man's land spot a thick, yellowish-green cloud rolling steadily over the muddy terrain toward their trench. Nobody runs. Nobody takes cover. Having never been warned that a weapon like this even exists, the soldiers simply watch the fog approach with pure curiosity. What exactly was inside that cloud? How did it manage to clear trenches when millions of artillery shells could not? And why did this single afternoon change the trajectory of modern combat? That spring afternoon, warfare moved beyond a purely physical struggle and became a toxic environmental one. By the spring of 1915, the Western Front had settled into a miserable, waterlogged stalemate defined by hundreds of miles of parallel trenches. Month after month, both sides launched repeated offensives. They took staggering casualties without achieving a single meaningful territorial breakthrough. German commanders were desperate to break this deadlock. That desperation drove them to secretly develop a new weapon, one that explicitly violated existing international agreements on the conduct of war. The weapon was chlorine gas, and its development was overseen by a German scientist named Fritz Haber. Haber offered the military a way to fight without a single bullet being fired. Released in large enough quantities, this gas could inflict massive casualties and clear enemy positions on its own. The mechanics of the attack were simple. German forces buried thousands of pressurized cylinders along their front line, waited for a favorable wind, and opened the valves, releasing over 150 tons of chlorine directly toward the Allied positions. This animation shows how chlorine attacks the body. Inhaled, it targets the respiratory system, rapidly degrading lung tissue and causing intense burning. For heavily exposed soldiers, the damaged tissues react by producing fluid, causing victims to essentially drown inside their own lungs. The immediate tactical result was total chaos. Coughing, gasping soldiers fled in a panic or collapsed outright, creating a massive, undefended gap in the Allied line. Troops could hide in bunkers to survive artillery shells, but they could not hide from the very air they needed to breathe. But the deployment of this gas revealed a deep tactical irony. German commanders had vastly underestimated how effective their own weapon would be. Because they didn't expect such a complete collapse of the Allied defense, they hadn't massed enough reserve infantry nearby to actually push through the giant opening they had just created. This delay gave Canadian and other Allied units time to scramble forward and violently plug the sudden hole in the defensive line before the Germans could reorganize and advance. These stabilizing troops quickly discovered desperate, improvised countermeasures. They found that holding wet cloths, soaked in water or even urine, over their faces could temporarily neutralize the chlorine as they fought. A lack of strategic foresight turned what was intended to be a decisive breakthrough into just another chaotic scramble to maintain the trenches. By the time the fighting around Ypres finally wound down in late May, the front lines had barely shifted. The human cost of the engagement, however, was staggering. Combined casualties across both sides reached roughly 70,000 men. Yet despite that massive death toll and the use of a terrifying new technology, neither side achieved a decisive breakthrough. The Second Battle of Ypres ultimately reinforced the exact same frustrating, grinding pattern of trench warfare that the gas had been designed to solve. The legacy of Ypres lies in the chemical warfare Pandora's box it opened, provoking immediate and worldwide outrage. Outrage quickly morphed into imitation. Both sides rapidly developed deadlier chemical agents, starting with chlorine, escalating to phosgene, and eventually mustard gas. With this invisible threat, gas masks became standard, mandatory survival equipment. The trauma inflicted by these agents was so profound that after the war, chemical weapons became one of the few forms of armament formally banned by modern international treaties. Today, Ypres stands as a grim milestone, the moment soldiers first looked up and saw death itself drifting toward them on the wind.